Batteries to power. Turbines to speed.
Ready to move out.
Before we start, I'd like to say something. There's no reason why you shouldn't have complete confidence in your chances to come out of this thing alive in one piece.
From coast to coast, from border to border, from one end to the other, and all points in between. The Classic Guitar Rock Podcast is on.
Yes! That's awesome!
We crank up and break down the great guitar-driven rock of the 70s and 80s, and you are invited to come along.
We got a full tank of gas, half a pack of cigarettes, it's dark, and we're wearing sunglasses. Hit it.
And now your hosts, Jeremy and Jeff.
1/2 teaspoon for fast, effective relief.
It's time for the Classic Guitar Rock Podcast.
Welcome to the Classic Guitar Rock Podcast. We are clear up to episode 18, Jeff. Can you believe it? We started the end of November. I think November 30th was our first episode.
Is that right?
Yeah, I think so. And we're up to episode 18. Last week, we missed Jeff. We had our interview with Neil from Def Leppard Pod, and that was a great episode. So go out and listen to that. I'm really excited about today's episode. We're going to be covering an album that came out on this day yesterday. We originally were going to record yesterday. I wasn't able to record yesterday, so we're a day off. But on this day, April 8th, way back in 1975, this classic album from Aerosmith came out. It's Toys in the Attic. I know Jeff is a big Aerosmith fan. I'm an Aerosmith fan too, and we'll talk about this when we get into it. This is a great album and a great recommendation on Jeff's part. So, Jeff, how are you doing?
I'm doing well. Thank you. I missed you last week.
Yeah, we missed you.
I was in Utah.
Skiing or snowboarding.
I was hoping for some powder, but no fresh snow.
No fresh snow. And they say that Utah, you're a snowboarder. You've been there. Mm-hmm. I've never skied.
No, I haven't been in Utah.
Oh, you hadn't been there. Okay. They claim it's the best snow on earth.
Yes, so, and then the week I go, it was more like what you might be used to back when you grew up or I grew up.
Yeah.
Icy. It was just icy, scrapey.
Yeah.
But what an amazing little place. I don't know if you've ever been in Snowbird.
I've never been to Snowbird. I have been to Park City. I've been to Park City. Yeah. Never been to Snowbird. And I was at Park City for work. And on one of the days, we could either go skiing or go snowmobiling, and I chose the snowmobiling. Mm-hmm. But Park City, as a resort, it's beautiful. But I've heard Snowbird's the place. The Snowbird's the place.
It's interesting. It's one of those. It felt a little bit European.
Mm.
It was just steep, and they have a tram, like a full-on tram,
right?
You could take this tram up. You could take a tunnel through the mountain to get to the backside.
Wow.
And then you can go down part of that backside and you're in Alta, a different mountain.
Alta. Yeah, I've heard of Alta.
So that's kind of, and it's not a huge mountain, but it is steep and you're nuzzled in this canyon and there's not a lot there. Mm. There's a few hotels with some restaurants and that's it. There's no town. There's no village. People are serious about their skiing.
Yeah, well, that's cool. And I've heard. So hopefully next time you go, you'll get some famous Utah powder.
I hope so.
We'll see. And I don't want to embarrass Jeff or put him on the spot. Jeff has been working on bumper music for us. We've played a few bumpers. We've got 2 new ones that we'll play today, and I have to say these are really, really good. And we were just kind of talking about at some point it would be cool if we compile these and make them available or whatever, or maybe make them available to our Patreon users. But these bumpers that Jeff has made are really good. And so I told Jeff, I said, you should do a full-on like instrumental album because they're really that good. I really think they're that good. And so we'll be hearing more of those bumpers from Jeff today.
Very kind of you, my friend.
You got to come up with names. You got to name these profound.
I've got names.
Okay, good.
Usually I come up with ridiculous names. I just named them Bumper 1, 2, 3 just to kind of in my mind.
I like it. And here's the thing is, and you even alluded to this, is you've got to think in 30 seconds, which in a way makes it easier, but probably makes it harder in some ways too. You know, you don't have to fill as much space, but you've got to say, I've got 30 seconds to make a musical statement, right?
For me, it's much easier.
I would think it would be easier
because it's just, I think as guitar players, I'm speaking for everyone, but I should maybe just speak for me. We come up with these little riffs or pieces, or even just a strum with a couple chords. And then you're like, I don't have a before and after. And then you just forget it.
So,
or I just let it go because I'm thinking, anybody can just do that. And then I just let it go. But if you could kind of wrap something kind of around it and just be happy with 20 seconds,
right,
then you have it. It's in like your toolbox. And then who knows where it could go in the future.
And as you were saying that, I just thought, you know, that's the perfect venue for someone with a short attention span like me, you know. Yeah. 30 seconds. I just got to do something for 30 seconds. That's perfect.
So if you write something, do you need, I know some people do and some don't, but do you need rhythm? Do drums help you? Because they help me for sure.
Definitely. So oftentimes if there's nothing, if I don't have any ideas, just playing a drum track or something kind of can spur that. Sometimes it's just a sound. Okay. It's just the sound of a guitar, not necessarily what you're playing, but just the way it sounds might inspire you to come up with something or whatever, but they're really good. So you had a couple things you wanted to share.
A couple of news clips.
Awesome.
I thought I always like to see who's selling what as far as musicians go. Like Clapton had that $1 million, or was it $1 million for one of his Strats?
Oh, I saw that. Yeah.
We have Metallica's Kirk Hammett, $38,000 Strat on an auction, Heritage Auctions. I believe it's a London thing. Mm-hmm. The same one he used in the video One.
Okay, I remember the video.
Yeah, which was Metallica's first video.
Is this Strat single coils?
No, it's an ESP. Sorry.
Oh, so it's okay. So it's okay.
It's an ESP.
Okay. Of course,
I see that body style, and I think
Strat. Yeah, and of course, Kirk Hammett, famous for owning the famous Peter Green Les Paul.
That's right.
And that Les Paul is a fascinating history, because before Kirk owned it, Gary Moore owned it, and when Gary Moore got it, this is just so funny. It was just different in the 60s, right? The guitar playing, early 60s, early 70s. Gary Moore got this guitar from Peter Green, and think of Peter Green. Peter Green's one of the blues greats. I mean, he's awesome. And Gary Moore talks about getting this Les Paul, and the strings were like years old. He said they were just cruddy, and Gary's like, dude, you ever change the strings? And he's like, well, you think I should? You know, and it was like, now
he sounds amazing.
Yeah. Now players like change their strings every show. You know, it's ridiculous.
So this is very serendipitous for two things, because my next little news comment is about Peter Green.
Oh, wow. Awesome.
How funny. Bunch of amazing musicians got together right before COVID in the Palladium in London. Mm-hmm. And they performed a tribute to Peter Green. And, you know, from Billy Gibbons, Pete Townsend, Steven Tyler, and awesome. David Gilmour, they just released a video. They're going to release I think they're the like DVD kind of box set kind of thing, but they just released a streaming little video with David Gilmour on pedal.
Oh,
I'm sorry, lap steel, doing Albatross.
Oh, cool.
You know that tune? I'm sure you know that song.
I do know that tune.
So go out there, you guys, if you're a fan of Peter Green and that song, and that's it's just a beautiful song. And
there's a clip I saw of Billy Gibbons. Okay, this is, speaking of serendipitous, this will bring in lots of things. Maybe you've seen this. There's a clip of Billy Gibbons singing Green Manalishi, right? Well, most of us think of Green Manalishi as a Judas Priest song. Well, it was originally a Fleetwood Mac song.
That's right.
And it is just so surreal to see Billy Gibbons singing Green Manalishi more in the Peter Green style than the Judas Priest style, but it's rocks, man. And it's from that same show. I'm pretty sure. I don't know why else Billy Gibbons would be singing.
I'm sure, because they've been teasing it for some months now.
Right.
And the other serendipitous thing is one of my comments about Aerosmith we'll talk about. It's one of the songs that turned him on to sort of this rock, funky, sort of greasy, sexy to music was Rattlesnake Shake, was it?
Rattlesnake Shake. Okay.
And in this tribute, Steven Tyler is there and he sings this song. So I thought, wow, what a trip. We're doing all of it. It's all tied together, man.
All these were tied together. And we honestly did not even talk about this before we just brought it up. Fascinating.
The last thing is Roger Waters is he had a 2020 tour plan that obviously was canceled, and now he just announced this is not a drill US tour 2022.
2022. Okay. All right.
Yeah. And his quote is, "It's a rock and roll show that's about the fact that this is our lives ending. We're standing in the precipice and it needs the slightest little nudge and will be yesterday's news. This is not a drill," is me shouting from my rooftop and hoping that you all start shouting from your rooftops and we'll all start acting as one and put an end to this madness. I know, what a way to kick off a tour.
I'm excited to go out.
Oh my God, buddy.
He's got Don Henley-itis. Roger Waters is like Don Henley, right? It's like, dude,
little ego.
I mean, you're a great musician, but if you would just play music, I could dig it. But anyways, that's a whole nother story.
We'll do Dark Side someday or something.
Oh yeah. And Roger Waters, I don't mean to slight Roger Waters. Roger Waters is a brilliant guy, smart guy. It's just sometimes for some of us, music is release, music is fun. That doesn't mean it can't be poignant and have a message, but man, I used to always joke, it took me a long time to where I consider myself a Pink Floyd fan just because it was so depressing at times. It was like, I don't want to listen to this kind of music all the time.
Yeah.
And that's, I think a lot of that is Roger Waters. That's just kind of his mindset. He's kind of a very serious, I don't want to say dark, but just kind of, that's just kind of how he's wired. So whatever.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Jeff. And I'm really looking forward to talking about Toys in the Attic. And that's exactly what we'll do when we come back. And taking us into this break is this awesome bumper that Jeff made. Check this out. Attention! If you live in Spokane, Washington, and have teeth, this message is for you. Braun and Jarvis Family Dentistry knows teeth. Incisors, bicuspids, canines, molars. No tooth is too big or too small.
I was delighted and impressed. So impressed, I bought the company.
With Braun and Jarvis, you'll have the sweetest grill in the inland Northwest. And let's be honest, nobody wants a funky grill. Braun and Jarvis Family Dentistry. 509-464-2391. That's 509-464-2391. Braun and Jarvis Family Dentistry. Quality dentistry that doesn't suck. Hi, this is Jeremy London from the Classic Guitar Rock Podcast. Did you know that one of the most efficient and effective ways for businesses to reach potential customers is by advertising on podcasts? You see, unlike radio, TV, and social media, where advertising is literally background noise or clutter, podcast listeners are much more tuned in and engaged than those audiences. They've tuned in to actually listen to the podcast. And even more important, podcasts are very niche-oriented. This allows businesses to send their message to a very specific and targeted audience. For instance, the Classic Guitar Rock Podcast core demographic is 40 to 60-year-old males who like classic rock. Now, if that is your target market, then this podcast is an excellent way to reach them. Oh, and by the way, this podcast is one of the top 3% most popular shows out of over 2 million podcasts globally, according to ListenNotes.com.
You would be pleasantly surprised to see how inexpensive it is to advertise on our podcast. If you are a business owner and want to reach a growing audience around the world, you should talk to us while there's still availability. If you're interested, email us at classicguitarrock@mail.com. That's classicguitarrock@mail.com.
Exclusively on ESPN Plus, UFC 313, Saturday. Reigning light heavyweight champion Alex Pereira defends his title against number one contender Magomed Ankalaev, and an explosive lightweight bout between Justin Gaethje and Rafael Pazzi. UFC 313, Saturday at 10 p.m. Eastern. Buy it on ESPNplus.com/PPV.
Welcome back to the Classic Guitar Rock Podcast, and bringing us back in another excellent bumper by Jeff. And Jeff, this is just awesome. These are awesome, and I would totally buy a CD of your bumpers. I love it, and it's perfect for someone with a short attention span like me. They're 30 to 40 seconds long. That's just awesome. They sound.
Thank you. You're kind.
Okay, so Aerosmith, Toys in the Attic. And I just want to get this off my chest right at the beginning. I have been guilty of what we call recency syndrome, right? I have been guilty of pinning my opinions to recent history. And when I say recent, I mean like 1990,
Yeah.
But because in my mind, first of all, okay, Steven Tyler is an iconic frontman. I mean, he's one of the best. He really is. I've always thought
most definitely in any context, even the cheesy, I think cheesy ballady kind of poppy stuff.
And here's the thing: you get torn, right? And here's what fans do. So, for instance, I'll just throw out an example. A good friend of Aerosmith is Cheap Trick. They've toured a lot together. They're fans of each other. Blah blah blah. So, Cheap Trick, because the body of their work, right? Their most popular song, number one song, was a ballad, The Flame. Cheap Trick fans hate The Flame. Oh, I hate that song because it represents everything that rock fans hate. It represents commercialism, selling out, wimping out. They used an outside writer, all of this stuff. And all of this happened with Aerosmith. We're going to talk about that too. But the reality is, had there never been a Flame, Cheap Trick probably would have been done in the mid 80s, right? Had there never been Permanent Vacation and Angel and Ragdoll and Dude Looks Like a Lady, 3 songs that I hate. Now, hate's a strong word. I actually like Angel. Angel's a great ballad, but Dude Looks Like a Lady and Ragdoll, that's what I think of when I hear Aerosmith. And I'm like, I'm just not. I was working in radio when Pump came out. Loving an Elevator, it was okay. And that was a massive album, by the way. Pump and Get a Grip, which came out the next album, phenomenal albums, made them tons of money, which you got to appreciate. That's what keeps them in business, right? But I never was a big fan of Ragdoll and Dude Looks Like a Lady. And I said this at the very beginning, and I own this record. I just haven't listened to it probably since 1980.
Yeah.
That's an exaggeration because I didn't even own it till about 1985. I had forgotten how good this album is. It's a really good album. And I'm going to turn it over to you, but I want to share. This is my formative years. This was my first exposure to Toys in the Attic. I moved between my 7th grade and 8th grade from Oklahoma to Montana. And I went from a big school to a school that the 8th grade class was 5 kids. There was me and a guy named Lyle, and then 3 girls. That was the 8th grade. And we were in a classroom combined with 6th and 7th graders. So fortunately, day one, me and this Lyle kid hit it off, and we became really good friends. And the end of that first week of school, I spent the night at his house and we listened to Toys in the Attic. That was my first exposure to Toys in the Attic. And that just kind of became a record that we listened to a lot. And I can remember riding around. He had a motorcycle and I'd hop on the back of his motorcycle and we'd ride all over the mountains in Montana singing, Walk This Way and Adam's Apple. And I mean, that's what we did. Right. So I have a lot of really fond memories of this album tied to the nostalgia piece. Right. But when I try to separate myself from that and just listen to it, which I've been doing over the last week, this is a really, really solid album.
Yes.
It's a classic. So
I have the same nostalgic thing going on. I think we talked about it a little bit in the past, but AC/DC on a cassette, little recorder,
right.
sixth grade. And that was the start of my rock and roll journey. I remember going to a store and I don't remember if anybody told me to buy this album, but I saw it on the rack and I just purchased it on cassette.
Yeah.
And it became one of my 3 or 4 introductions to rock and roll. And I would play this thing like crazy, not really understanding what I was listening to. So when I listen to it now, it just shoots me back. And to comment on your 80s thing, I mean, a lot of bands, I think so much, I think you forget nowadays because of the internet, really, and how the gig economy and the do-it-yourself thing and music industry's changed so much with streaming.
Right.
But, you needed record companies and A&R people, and you needed their influence and their funds. So, and then the style just happened to get cheesy in the 80s.
Right.
When Aerosmith was given another chance, or they got clean and decided to kind of do it again, happened to be cheesy. If it were like 70s style, who knows?
Right.
Style, not only style culturally, but the music was also changing.
Exactly.
Right. Hair bands and metal bands. So I think I think it was really hard to not get pulled into that.
I mentioned Cheap Trick. I mentioned Aerosmith, but to your point, you're spot on. You could go to look at every band that's been around, every band. I'm trying to think of an exception, but at some point, the reason they got big is they expanded their tent, right? And how do you do that? You do something mainstream that draws in the masses. And so we talked, there's a major theme in our discussion about Def Leppard last week. Same thing, same point is, for some reason, we as fans are, they're my band. They were really cool when they were my band, but now that they're everybody's band, they're not cool. They sold out, right? And I just think that's natural. I was thinking of Yes, reading the posts on Owner of a Lonely Heart. Okay, so people that were introduced to Yes by that song, Owner of a Lonely Heart, love that song.
Right.
But the diehard Yes fans hate Owner of a Lonely Heart. And yet it is just a simple fact that if Owner of a Lonely Heart hadn't happened, Yes would have not existed after 1980. Yeah. They would have been done. They were done.
I've said it before, and I'll say it again. I think MTV had a lot to do with
big
this.
Time. Oh,
because all of a sudden you're seeing,
right, and
maybe Friday Night Videos.
Yeah,
you're seeing the style, and you're seeing the band for the first time in a totally different way.
Yeah,
that's never. But Aerosmith has always remained super cool. They can do these things. They could play the Super Bowl with Britney Spears, and somehow they can still be
cool.
Kind of scratchy, scruffy rock and roll guys.
And for some reason, Jeff, I remember the Eagles episode a few episodes back where I made the case. I wasn't saying I necessarily agreed with this, but I said the case could be made that the Eagles are the biggest American band. I wasn't even thinking of Aerosmith because, to be honest, it's not even close. I mean, I shouldn't say that. I haven't looked at total album sales, but the body of work, how many albums has Aerosmith put out? I mean, they've put out a lot of albums, twice as many as the Eagles for sure. And they've kind of been like, Tom Petty is a perfect example. Tom Petty, until he died, obviously, Tom Petty from the mid 70s through the 90s into the 2000s, he was never the biggest band in the world, but he was relevant that whole time. I mean, you cannot find a 2 to 3 year period where he didn't have music that was getting played on the radio, on rock radio, even top 40 radio. So he had a very long, successful career. Aerosmith, they had a break, right? They had about a 4-year break where they were in the toilet. The stuff they were still putting stuff out, but it just wasn't very successful. But you think about it, from the early 70s through the 2000s, man, I can't think of a band that has had a longer run. You know, they're up there with like the Rolling Stones. The Rolling Stones got to a point where they were kind of they've been going through the motions for the last 20 years, right? But Aerosmith, again, has stayed relevant. They had
a little bit of the break when Joe left. Well, I guess you're right. They did put out a couple albums.
Yeah, they put out albums without Joe, and then Brad left for one album too. Yeah. So there was that from 79 to 84. So like almost a 5-year period that Joe was gone, and then like three of those years, Brad was gone.
Toys in the Attic sold a lot of albums.
Yes, it did.
8 million or something, which back then it was huge,
giant.
Huge. It's no Back in Black, but
yeah, but it's really good. Do we want to get into the history a little bit? Let's talk about the history just a little bit.
Yeah, I didn't know that Steven Tyler's dad, playing classical piano, had such an influence on him, and it shows.
Yeah,
but he sort of took that and combined it with this greasy,
R&B
funky,
rock.
Groovy riff rock. And Joe Perry, I mean, God, he's just one of the masters of the riff.
Oh,
maybe Brad Whitford too. I don't know.
Oh, yeah, and that was what I was going to ask you is, I'm assuming that Perry's on the right side and Whitford's on the left when you listen. I'm not sure though. I think Perry probably plays most of the leads, but I don't know that either. This is one band I've never seen live. I've never seen Aerosmith live, other than clips on YouTube or whatever. But I've never seen.
I have not either.
But the history piece is kind of interesting. I said this earlier. Is it Lake Sunapee, which is
Sunapee, New Hampshire? Yeah,
New Hampshire. And Jeff is from the East Coast. You're from Connecticut, right?
Mm-hmm.
So where you grew up. Here's the thing. For those of us in the West, I spent on 2 different occasions extended time in New Hampshire for work. And what shocked me is you could hop in your car and drive for 90 minutes and might be in 4 different states. That doesn't happen in the West, right? So you can drive all day and not make it across Montana, right? So that kind of blew me away. The fact that, you talk about New Hampshire and Connecticut and Boston, they're all kind of close together. I'm not super familiar with that geography. So, because Aerosmith is always, the Boston Bad Boys, they're affiliated with Boston. And yet the story kind of started in New Hampshire at this Lake Sunapee.
Yep.
And there was a place called the Barn where bands would play. And apparently to Tom Hamilton, the bass player, and Joe played together in a band. What were they called, Jeff? I don't remember. The Jam Band.
The Jam Band.
So they were in the Jam Band.
Who knew? They coined a genre.
Jam Band. And Steven Tyler had a number of bands that he'd been in, and some of them had even had, I think one had even had a record or something. I don't remember.
Yeah. I think he had a couple records, and he was already doing his thing.
He was doing his thing. And Joe and Tom kind of, I don't know if idolize is the word, but they really liked Steven Tyler's band. And every time there was a chance to go see him play at the Barn, which was literally a big barn by Lake Sunapee where bands would play and kids would dance. This is mid 60s, right?
I'm kind of jealous. I want a barn.
Yeah, that would be sweet. And that's exactly what I'd do. If I had a barn, I'd make it into a place to play and have dances.
One of my dreams. Mark my word, today it'll happen somewhere in Colorado. You come see us.
They'd go into the Barn to see Steven Tyler play. And I guess they'd kind of gotten to know each other. But there's a funny story. Steven Tyler had quit one of his bands. He was kind of in between bands. And Joe Perry pulls up in his little, I think it was a little MG, pulls up in his little MG and they'd kind of gotten to know each other a little bit. And he invites Stephen Perry to come watch he and Tom's band, the jam band, play at the barn that night. And Steven Tyler said, I didn't have anything else to do, so I went up and watched him. And he says they were terrible. He says they were terrible, but they went into one song, and I can't remember the song.
The Rattlesnake Shake.
That's what it was. The Rattlesnake Shake. And he said,
that's it.
That's the song, man.
He said they were playing like really fast and they were out of tune. But this song was kind of slowed down, and it had that
it had the pop
dynamics, and it had that pocket of that groove.
Yeah.
And by the way, one of his bands was Chain Reaction. He was 18 years old in 1966.
Yeah.
Steven Tyler.
That was kind of the beginning. Interestingly enough, and you really see it. I want to be careful the way I say this, because I don't want to sound like a jerk. Steven Tyler, he has an interesting look, right?
Mm-hmm.
And as a kid, they made fun of him. And you really notice it when you see the little black and white pictures of him as a kid. He was born in 1948. So he's what? 70. I'm trying to do the math in my head. 7. So in
75,
74, he's getting up there, right? But when you see these black and white pictures from the 50s, when he was a little kid, he's got that skinny little nose and big mouth, and he got a lot of grief. And they made fun of him, and he turned to music as a way to be accepted, right? Maybe they won't, because he wanted to play in the cafeteria. He wanted to play music in the cafeteria with the cool kids. And, those kids probably don't make fun of him now, but back then,
Well, I just love one of his things he said was, you fake it till you make it.
Yeah.
So he just was faking being a rock star.
Yeah.
And he manifested it. And of
And-
course, he has an amazing voice and a persona, and he could play the piano.
Yes.
So,
and he plays guitar too. You don't think of him as a guitar player, but he can. He started out as a drummer. Well,
right, which we can talk about
as a kid. But yeah, he was a drummer.
He played Walk This. He
came up with the beat. Yeah,
which fun. Who knew with foreshadow.
Exactly. But he is very interesting, and no one sounds like Steven Tyler. No one. You can't think of any singer. He has got such a distinct voice. And watching the interviews, I just like him. I like Steven Tyler. I like him. Joe Perry comes across as super level-headed, right? I mean, he to this day. Well, I guess they're not touring currently, but for the last 40 years, right? 30 years, when he tours, he brings his whole family with him.
Yeah, now he does.
He's like they're in the early days, Walk This Way, Toys in the Attic era, that wasn't the case, but really since like the 80s, since Permanent Vacation on, when he tours, it's the whole family. But even in the early days, one of the bones of contention was
the
girlfriends. Okay, so Steve or Joe Perry was very much about hanging out with his girlfriend. And in the early days, the band all shared an apartment in Boston. Can you imagine what that would have been like? They all shared this apartment in Boston, but there was beginning to be this tension between Steven and Joe, because the rest of the band, they were like a band of brothers, they hung out all the time and did everything together, good and bad, right? And here Joe Perry he just wanted to hang out with his girlfriend. He was kind of the anti-rock star in a lot of ways. That's kind of the way I see it. And there was tension. And of course, huge tensions between the different girlfriends in the band. And that was a common theme, is they'd tour and all of them would have girlfriends around, and there would be some girlfriends that they could not be in the same room together. There was a situation where the one
spilt
milk on one of them. You talk about crying over spilled milk. I mean, that's exactly what it was.
The irony is thick.
Oh, it's just crazy. It was just fascinating to see. Now, here's the other thing. B.B. Buell was the model that Steven Tyler, they were never married. They weren't even together that long.
No.
But he years later, well, not years later, a few months later after they broke up, he finds out that BB is having a baby, and she has this baby, and this baby is who we know now as Liv Tyler, right? I did not know this until I watched this documentary, that Liv's dad, okay, not her biological dad, but her dad, BB's husband, was Todd Rundgren.
Yeah.
So Liv Tyler was basically, Todd Rundgren was her dad.
For like 9 or 10 years.
For like 9 or 10 years. I don't think she met Steven Tyler until she was a teenager.
I feel like, maybe 11, 12, 13.
Yeah.
Something like that.
But Steven Tyler talks about when he first saw Liv, he wasn't.
Obviously, she's mine.
That's what he said. He said, we didn't need a DNA. I mean, I knew that she was my daughter, when he saw her. Just fascinating. And now they've got a good relationship and all of this. But the thing about Aerosmith, and this has been a recurring theme, they came so close to losing it all. I mean, Steven Tyler's drug addiction was so bad that people were afraid he was going to die.
Yeah.
And there were a couple times where he would pass out on stage and couldn't get back up, and they'd have to end the shows. I don't think it was as bad during the Toys in the Attic, but it was kind of after that. Toys in the Attic was the one that really broke them big.
Yes.
And so I'm sure with that came more drugs, more of that. And
the heroin came.
The heroin,
not that cocaine is better, but
it's not the same as heroin. Absolutely. Heroin was a completely different beast. And Jack Douglas, the producer, even talks about how back in the 70s, the record companies would provide budget for coke. Okay. That was just part of the recording process. Make sure these guys have enough coke that they can crank this album out, right?
On budget, on time.
That's exactly.
I think you could argue they did hit rock bottom. They really did. They were playing arenas. They were headlining AC/DC and Van Halen.
Yeah, yeah.
And then when they hit bottom, they were in a club in Boston, I believe, that there was like, it fit 200 or 300 people or something, and they played this club and it was like half full. So you could argue that it was pretty much done. I think they were broke. I think they were all pretty much broke. So I think one of Steven Tyler's current wife helped him get sober, and it took about 4 years for all the members to finally be done and be sober, and then they had this sort of second life.
If I read it,
which is rare.
If I read it right, by the way, Rock in a Hard Place, I always loved Lightning Strikes, the song Lightning Strikes. I remember that video on MTV, and I remember thinking, man, Steven Tyler, he looks really weird. But I dug that song. I love that song. But that song or that album, Rock in a Hard Place, and then the following, Done with Mirrors, were basically, I don't want to say they were failures, because they both, Lightning Strikes was marginal. I mean, it got like into the 30s on the 200 rock chart, but those two albums were disappointments. They were at the height of their drug fueled addictions. Joe Perry had left, Brad Whitford had left.
Yeah.
And I think, if I'm correct, Perry was the first one to get cleaned up. I think he's the first one that
he left first, right?
He's no. I'm sorry. I meant to say Steven Tyler. I was thinking Steven Tyler.
Oh, maybe. I know, but Joe Perry left, right?
Joe Perry left in 79, Joe Perry Project, which is pretty dang good, actually. The first Joe Perry, Let the Music Do the Talking, it's pretty good. I like it. I like that riffy. It was good. Where was I going with this? Oh, my point was they brought on that new manager, the guy who was the doctor. Can't remember his name.
Yeah.
I was just reading it. Who wound up being kind of a butthead. But at the beginning, he saved their life, and he told them, he said, guys, you can be the biggest band in the world if you will clean up. And this was 84, 80, this is around 85. One thing happened first, right? Before this happened. And that was Run DMC. I was working in radio.
Before this happened?
This was before they got cleaned up. They didn't get cleaned up until after. Well, Tyler had, but the rest of the band was not. They were not completely clean until.
Oh, because they kind of went back. They did a little. That's right.
It wasn't until, and I think Permanent Vacation was 88, right?
Yeah, I think so.
87 or 88.
Give or take.
But it was between Run DMC, which was 86. And I remember working at a radio station in Oklahoma when that song came out. And it was like, for those of us that were familiar with Toys in the Attic, it was, on the one hand, it was pretty cool that it was Aerosmith, but then on the other hand, it was rap. And you're like, oh, but it wound up being like a number 2 hit.
I mean, it brought them back into the huge way.
You could make the case that was the hinge moment. That was where it turned around.
Brought them back from the dead. Really.
Brought them back from the dead. And then they were all cleaned up by the time Permanent Vacation came out. And then Permanent Vacation was just exploded. You had Angel, you had Dude Looks Like a Lady, you had Ragdoll, all the stuff I said I didn't like. But from a historical nature, they have been huge since then. They've been huge since.
Yeah, with a lot of ballads.
a lot of ballads.
Which seems to sell well. Timeless, really, and almost in any era.
When did Jaded come out?
I mean, honestly, I'm one of those people that I love Aerosmith so much because of their past and because of what they've done.
Exactly.
I don't follow them really much, their new stuff. I couldn't tell you what albums came out when, and even what the biggest hits are.
But just a few interesting things. Jaded, I'm just trying to find when Jaded came out, because I thought Jaded was awesome.
But while you're looking, before I forget, because we should probably get into the album soon.
Yeah, okay. We better. Yeah,
we could have supplemental podcasts.
Exactly.
Steven Tyler wrote "Dream On" and it was on the first album. That's just unbelievable, amazing.
He wrote the song when he was like 16.
It's unbelievable.
So years before.
I mean, the guy was born to do what he's doing and what he's done.
Yeah,
which is why we're sitting here talking about him.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
Jaded came out. It's older than I thought. Came out in 2000. It's on Just Push Play, which was a very popular album, but great song, and there were other songs too. Janie's Got a Gun was a great song. They won a Grammy for that song, but again, a different vibe than the stuff you and I like, from Toys in the Attic and all of that. So anyways, let's talk about the album. I'll let you go first and I'll try not to interrupt you, but you know how bad I am at that. So what are the high points of Toys in the Attic?
Joe Perry and Brad, I can't tell you how much I love the riffs.
Yeah.
They're just the sound, it's got to be Marshall, kind of Les Paul-y, what I'm thinking, but he just writes catchy riffs.
Yeah.
And then not only does Steven Tyler have a great voice, melodically, he's writing some great stuff, but he can do that. He could do that, like, I don't want to say rappy thing, but he's very like scatty and really rhythmic with his vocals, with his lines. Combined with a hard Marshall rock kind of guitar, you get this really unique kind of thing.
Absolutely.
Gritty, groovy. And every tune, I mean, I got Toys in the Attic is just, I love the song so much. Mm-hmm. I love how the guitars are panned. And I'm pretty sure it's Perry doing that riff on one. But I have them almost in order of what they are in the album.
Really?
I love Uncle Salty.
I love Uncle Salty. Yeah.
It's got that chill vibe. Is it about a crazy, sketchy uncle? I don't know.
I'm not sure, but I one of the notes I have is the totally 70s chorus, about the sun. The sun. And I mean, it's just,
outside my window.
Yeah, I love that. I love that.
Kind of a call and response kind of thing.
Exactly. And when I think of, remember I told you how I was exposed to this album, my friend Lyle, they had 80 acres, so basically a big kind of like a farm. There's a big apple tree right outside. You know, his room was up on the second floor. The window would be open. And that just brings back the memories of being at his house. The sun, it's just a great, and I love that song. It's a great song.
Yeah, I do too.
Yeah.
Adam's Apple is just kind of amazing.
Yeah.
As far as like, who would write a song like that?
Exactly.
With those lyrics.
Very, very, he's a very clever lyricist. He really is. Yeah.
Yes.
Even Walk This Way, when you think about.
Yeah. Again, how he also is singing the words. One of the, now that you bring that up, I think it was No More, No More.
Uh-huh.
If you go Google the lyrics and then listen to the song, how he sings those words and the rhythm that he does,
right?
And how because it's really, I don't know if you've tried to sing certain kind of lyrics and lines are really challenging,
right?
To the inflection and all that, and he just has it down, just like nobody else.
Yeah.
And that's one of the songs that I just really also love. I love the acoustic, mellow kind of beginning, and No More, No More, track number 7. I mean, who doesn't love the Sweet Emotion talk box?
Oh, it's awesome. Yeah.
Interesting about that song is Tom Hamilton came up with that bass lick.
Yeah.
And if you go listen to
awesome.
Jeff Beck's Beckola album, Rice Pudding, the last song on that.
I never thought about that.
There is a line in there. There's a piece in there that's da-na-na-na-na-na-na-na-na. It's got almost the same kind of thing. And I thought, awesome. That's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
Where else?
What do you like? You like Round and Round? That's one of I like Round and Round too.
I like it because it's different.
Yeah.
It's a little dark and a little weird.
Yeah. It
always tapped into some sadness in me. I don't know why, or some uncomfortableness.
Yeah.
I love the Walk This Way kind of story where like Joe Perry was playing this riff. Steven Tyler jumped on the drums, but there was no lyric.
Tell us.
They were in Times Square, right? They recorded this album in Times Square. Yeah. 1975.
And this was like the last song, right? Wasn't this going to be the last song? They needed a last.
Yeah.
song.
I think they were pretty much done.
Yeah.
And they didn't have lyrics. So they just took a break and they went in Times Square. They went and saw Young Frankenstein and the Hunchback.
Right. Marty Feldman.
Marty Feldman.
Yeah.
There was a part of that movie where he's kind of like, Igor. Okay, walk this way.
Yeah.
And Steven Tyler was like, that's it.
Yeah.
And he wrote the lyrics in like 2 or 3 hours. Then left him in a cab on the way back to the studio the next morning. And people, the guys didn't believe him. And that's kind of like how that worked. Awesome. I just thought that was so funny.
And a little interesting backstory is, so the guys in Run DMC, rappers, and you think about it, that's why they made it a rap song. It's really a rap song. The verses it's like rap. And so they used to always, that's why they did the song, that was a song when that whole, scratching and all of that was coming out. They do a lot of Aerosmith. They liked those. There were certain rock songs that worked well for them to scratch with and for them to rap to. And that was one of them. That's why they wanted to do the song. And that kind of speaks to that whole rhythmic ability that Steven Tyler is able to do, as a vocalist. It's pretty cool.
It is pretty cool. One of the things about Walk This Way, I read, I don't know if you read the same, but they were opening for the Guess Who in Honolulu.
No, I didn't read this.
And that's where Joe Perry was fooling around with that riff. Wow. And he was kind of also referencing the Meters. Sissy Strut, which we play in our band.
Awesome.
So that's why I remembered that kind of piece. Because that Sissy Strut's got a riff that's kind of groovy and catchy. That's what he kind of had on his mind. So I thought that was kind of cool.
The mid 70s, because you talked about that interplay between, we kind of talked about it like in Life in the Fast Lane, the same type of deal where you're hearing two distinct guitar players playing similar but different things. I mean, they're just a little. So you got, and when I think about the 70s, you could point to, Felder and Walsh, Joe Perry, Brad Whitford, Pat Travers, Pat Thrall, a lot of these great riff heavy 70s guys that we miss that, right? We don't hear that, where you just have these riffing going on as these guys would do their own thing, complement each other. That's what I like. I hear it in Toys in the Attic. You know, if you listen, and just who would come up with these little riffs underneath the vocal? My favorite song actually is Toys in the Attic. That song for some reason is just, it's a weird song. The way the vocal comes in.
It's almost like they have a little, when they reverse on the vocal.
Exactly.
There's some kind of an effect when it comes back to the verse.
And it comes in a weird part of this. Like I would not. Exactly. And I would, and then you've got the riffs underneath. You hear it on one side, you hear it on the other. The kind of, you know, there's the, it's just, I don't even know how to explain it. The whole chorus, you know, toys.
It's a driving song.
It's a driving song.
It's hard to play. I've tried to play that riff. It's fast.
I
it's
can't.
Not blazing fast, but it's fast.
And even the riff of, you know, I think a lot of us learn the Walk This Way riff.
Definitely unique.
But then when you go up to C for the verse, that's the hard part for me.
Yeah.
Is I've never learned to play that right.
Even the verses are really that
exactly.
It's not just boom, boom.
There's a lot going on between the two guitar players. So
I've read that Joe Perry was more of the kind of like raw, more almost sloppier, and Brad Whitford was very polished and very clean. So together,
and that's what I've heard too. But I still don't know to this day who's playing what, you know, and that's why I need to go watch more footage and see. But
But Joe Perry's solos, I don't want to forget to mention, they're also kind of like just not your just basic straight ahead on the beat kind of things.
Right.
He's just kind of like, I don't know, I've never been on heroin, but it feels like if you were just kind of like, whoa, and he's playing just like Mama Kin, not on this album, the first album, but that solo is so weird.
It's almost
like, is it out of key or something?
It's almost, and I don't know the if this is the best word, but I think they almost sound backwards, right? It's like the way he comes in, it's not cliched, and that's what makes it cool, because it's easy to get cliched when you're playing, you know, pentatonic blues-based solos, but his are very fluid, but almost backwardy to me, if that makes sense. But I know exactly what you're talking about. I just don't know what words to put on it. Uncle Salty, I love Uncle Salty. The only throwaway song is Big 10-Inch Record, right? And that's a remake of an old blues song. Yeah. You know, it's one of those naughty blues songs from the 50s, you know, very innuendo. And of course, you know, when you're a 14-year-old boy, you just think it's hilarious, right? If I took that song out, I would say it's all killer, no filler, right? I think Big 10-Inch Record strikes me as kind of the filler tune. It's like Big Bad Bill is Sweet William Now on Diver Down, right? It's like, we got to fill this up. Let's do this old blues song. Not to say, you know, some people that might be their favorite song, but to me, that's the only filler on the album. Every other song on this album, I love. Really? I did not remember how much I liked this album. Adam's Apple is great. Walk This Way is a great song too. That's just the one that everyone knows. So if I was ranking them, I think I would say Toys is my favorite. Probably Uncle Salty is my favorite. You even said it's almost in the play order, right? Uncle Salty's probably and Adam's Apple's probably my third. From there, I'd probably go with Sweet Emotion. Again, that's a huge song too. Everyone knows that one.
Huge.
But you can't really pick a bad track on it.
I would put Round and Round, you know, at the bottom for me, but that's just because, like I said, I feel like it's just a little bit.
It's
dark.
kind of a little odd. I would maybe put that, but You See Me Crying's a great song too. That's a ballady song. But again, the bottom songs, you know, if you're giving everything else a 10, the bottom songs might be a 8.9. So big 10-inch is kind of the filler. So I don't even, to me, I kind of throw that out because it's just so different. It's a novelty song, right? Some bands would do novelty songs, and this is kind of a novelty song, and it's kind of.
I thought of you when I heard the harmonica. I know you're such a fan.
I will say this. Adam's Apple has horns on it.
Yes.
And one of the things that bugged me about Bruce Fairburn producing Permanent Vacation and Pump, and maybe he might have done Get a Grip, I can't remember. There's horns all over those. And you know how I feel about horns. Especially like Dude Looks Like a Lady and Ragdoll. Those are horn songs. That's why I hate them so bad. Take Me to the Other Side. I always love that song, and it's chock full of horns. I mean, I think there's like a clarinet solo or something in it, but I love that song. So it's just, I'm not consistent. I love to hate horns. I love to hate horn. And on a lot of this, Adam's Apple would be just fine without horns in it.
There's a cool double harmony guitar solo I have down in my notes here. Adam's Apple. I don't know if you remember. It's it reminds me a little bit of Joe Walsh and James Gang. He overdubs like a harmony kind of solo, and it just reminds me a little bit of that. It's very cool. Yeah,
I do know. There's one. Is that the song? I think it is Adam's Apple. There's one on the left side. The guy plays. That's probably Brad. He's playing the same riff it's like repeats itself like 4 times. He plays the same thing all 4 times. It's the right side that plays, like a third and then a fifth or what, and then it raises. And maybe that's the one you're talking about, but I noticed that on one of the songs. Very tight. And what they're good at is they've got busy guitar parts, busy single note, like the verse in Walk This Way. It's not just chords. They're not just chunking on chords. And those guys sync up very well together playing these single note figures. They're really tight. I don't know that they get that. We talk about Joe Perry a lot more than Brad Whitford, but maybe Brad Whitford doesn't get the credit he deserves, but they're just very tight.
Sort of like, Guns N' Roses, Slash, and Izzy.
Yeah.
If you go back and listen to Appetite for a debut album and the guitar parts on that, do yourself a favor, put some headphones on. It's unbelievable.
I have never. This is funny. I do not own Appetite for Destruction. I've never listened to the whole album, and I'm not saying I don't like Guns N' Roses. To be honest, I think "Sweet Child of Mine" is one of the greatest songs ever. I know it's kind of pop, whatever. I just think that is one of the best songs ever. I've just, for whatever reason, never gotten into Guns N' Roses, but I'm going to go back. We should do that album.
Yeah.
We should do that album.
Sure. It's the guitar work for that style, that hard rock kind of riff. It's awesome. And Izzy doesn't get probably enough credit.
No, he doesn't. Well,
because Slash wore the top hat,
Yeah, exactly. And Aerosmith, huge influence on Guns N' Roses. And Guns N' Roses was opening for Aerosmith. Aerosmith was out on permanent vacation. Appetite had just come out. Guns is opening for Aerosmith. Aerosmith, they'd all just gotten clean. And that was one of the challenges.
Here comes Guns N' Roses.
Here comes Guns N' Roses. It's like anti-clean, right? The opposite of clean. So that was a challenge for Aerosmith, right? It really was. Aerosmith was a huge influence on Guns N' Roses.
All right, where would you put? What do you think of No More, No More?
I like it. As I'm listening to it, I got to go back and listen to it. No, all I'm hearing is the chorus part. You mentioned the acoustic part, and yeah, I remember thinking that was cool. I got to go listen to it again. I liked it.
Yeah, bring up the lyrics and listen to it while you're reading the lyrics. It's very cool.
Have you looked at the lyrics for? I've never looked at the lyrics for Toys in the Attic. It's hard for me to understand what he's saying. I got to check out those lyrics because I think they're kind of.
I don't think I have either.
Going to be wild, but yeah, it's just a great album all the way around, and this kicked open. They had some success before, but this one really put them on the map, and they were an arena act here. And then, of course, that's what's interesting. Aerosmith is called, if not the greatest, one of the greatest comebacks ever, because they were literally, to your point earlier, they were down in the dumps and then came back massive in the late 80s and through the 90s. They were huge.
And there was that one guitar player before Brad.
Oh yeah,
back.
Frank, one of Steven's friends.
Yeah, and then he didn't last for more than a year. But other than that, the original lineup for 50 years.
Yeah, there's
more.
There's the 2 albums. Remember where Joe was gone, but you're right, and then they came back. But so there's like a 4-year gap there.
Yeah.
You could almost leave those 2 albums out, right? But
I think even those guitar players were like, yeah.
And that's the one guy. I saw the one interview. He's like,
what are we doing here?
What are we doing here? You guys need Joe back. Steve needed Joe because they were like, it was like, that's why the comparison to the Rolling Stones, right? I love Aerosmith way more than the Rolling Stones. I just got to say it was a team, right? They're Joe Perry, Steve and Tyler was a team and they needed each other. Right. That's not to say that the others aren't important also, but without Joe there, Steven kind of lost inspiration.
Yeah. The toxic twins, as they were called. The toxic
twins. Yep. So, and here's one last thing I thought was interesting. Do you remember who came up with the name of the band?
It wasn't Joe or Steven.
No, it was the drummer,
Joey Kramer.
Yeah. This is the other Joe, right? They had to read what was the book they had to read? They had to read a book that had the character Aerosmith, Arrows, Upton Sinclair book, the character Aerosmith. But Joey had said he'd been writing on his notebooks. Remember when you'd wrap your books in like the old grocery bags?
Oh yeah, the brown bag.
Brown bags.
Oh yes.
He would write Aerosmith spelled AERO Smith, Aerosmith all over it. And he just thought it was cool. And he eventually got the guys to buy off on that. And it's so funny because they were considering other stupider names, right? And I can't imagine them being called anything else. And you think about that iconic Aerosmith logo.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's like I don't know what it means, but it's a perfect name.
Yeah, I don't either.
Just associate it with them.
Oh, I remember drawing on those covers.
Oh, did you draw the Van Halen logo? You learned to draw the Van Halen logo.
100%.
I learned to write Ozzy's logo.
Yeah.
And I did Def Leppard, Judas Priest. I learned how to draw all these logos.
I remember Asia.
Oh, I remember the Asia logo. Yeah. The coolest logo of all time. Seriously, I don't know how this guy came up with it. Angel's logo.
Angels?
Angel. Remember Angel, the group Angel? You flip that upside down and it spells Angel.
No.
It's amazing. Oh yeah. It's amazing.
Were they were like what, hair band?
Yeah, they were they were like one of the first hair bands they were more 70s, late to mid 70s. Greg Giuffria from the band Giuffria came from
Angel. I remember Giuffria.
But if you look up the Angel logo,
I'm looking at it right now.
Yeah, if you flip it upside down, it says Angel.
Wow.
You see how that works?
It goes both ways.
Yeah, it's crazy. So that's brilliant. Whoever thought of that. Anyways, Jeff, I'm super excited you chose this album. I think we both agree that this was or is an excellent album. Very important for the band. This is what put them on the map for the first time. Then basically, 12 years later, they got put on the map again for the second time. So that's why one of the greatest comebacks ever. So
it was fun.
It was fun. And you guys need to go listen to this album. I very quickly want to thank our sponsor, Braun and Jarvis Family Dentistry here in Spokane, Washington. And I also want to encourage you all to share the podcast, listen to it, obviously, like it, subscribe, follow, leave us a review. Anything you can do, we surely appreciate it.
I would love in the review maybe for anybody to suggest an album that maybe we won't know about or don't know about, because I'm always open. And personally, I'm a 65 to 1980 kind of like, classic rock kind of person.
You like the 70s. I like the 80s stuff a little more than you do, but I tell you what, some of these albums that you and I have gone over that either one of us might not have chosen have been awesome. So it's great. And I love the idea in a review, or email us, classicguitarrock@mail.com. Make suggestions for albums or topics you'd like us to cover. and we'd love to do that. So having said that, Jeff, have a great weekend.
You too, buddy.
And we'll see you next week. We'll see you all next time on the Classic Guitar Rock Podcast.
Keep rocking.
Thanks for listening to the Classic Guitar Rock Podcast. Please like, subscribe, and share. You can email us at classicguitarrock@mail.com. We'll see you for the next episode of the Classic Guitar Rock Podcast.